Hey Matthew.
Hey, what's going on, Mark? How you doing?
Good, good. So this is Mark Goldberg with UN Dispatch, speaking with, as always,
It's Matthew Lee of Inner City Press, inside the United Nations.
So we're recording this on a Friday afternoon, and December is a busy time at the UN. Every other year there's a budget battle, but this is an off year. So what's going on these days, Matthew?
No, there's. I mean, the budget committee is meeting. We can get back into the nitty gritty of that, but it's true. It's not. On the budget, as an aside, Ban Ki-moon said he wanted to cut the budget by 2% across the board. Now a document has surfaced showing, in fact, budget rising. I mean, budget probably should rise, but there's some incongruity between what's said and what's done. But the reason that December there's a lot of Security Council meetings as opposed to like the budget's done by the General Assembly is that all these, it's just kind of, all of these, the mandate of these peacekeeping missions. Even though there have been some peacekeeping missions that have existed since the late 1940s, their mandate is rolled over every year. And so many of them, although sometimes it's staggered, many of them run out at the end of the year. For example, the Congo, Somalia, it's all so. And so even if some of these debates have taken place in the last couple of months about peacekeepers in Somalia, i.e. there are none. Congo, a few more peacekeepers. They're all having to go through the formalities of having a debate and voting. So as we speak, I'm actually off camera. The UN television is showing the briefing of the Security Council about the mission in Chad and the Central African Republic by one Victor Angelo. Okay. So there you have it.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about Congo, because I'm sure you saw this week this front page New York Times story by Lydia Paul-Green.
Sure. With accompanying video that I highly recommend, and I'm sure we will link to. There's like a 5-minute video.
With accompanying video and about this really sort of terribly tragic story of the rebels loyal to the Nkunda, one of the
Laurent Nkunda.
Laurent Nkunda, one of the sort of insurgents in eastern Congo, massacred pretty much a village. 150 people were killed, summarily executed, many of them. All the while, there was a peacekeeping. The UN peacekeeping base was only about a mile away.
That's correct.
And could not intervene. And
Human Rights claims they were not aware of it. Yeah.
Human Rights Watch as well put out a report describing the situation. I'd urge people to read the article, and it really, I think encapsulates I think the problem of Eastern Congo. You had these rebels that were ravaging a village so close to the UN compound there, but the UN had sort of no idea what was going on, and they didn't know what was going on. They and they said, in that New York Times piece, the point was made that they had no translators, they had no one in the field, they're totally under-resourced, understaffed.
Not the right vehicles to get to the scene.
Yeah, not the right vehicles. It was the situation where, to me at least, this sort of epitomizes kind of like we in the West, our response to the Congo crisis, because we say, well, we can authorize a peacekeeping mission and to take care of the conflict, and then once that mission is so authorized, we can sort of wash our hands of the responsibility of having to try to pick up the pieces when things go wrong.
But let's say because I definitely highly recommend both the article and again the accompanying video, which shows UN trucks going through the village 2 days before the massacre took place. It's really quite close to a UN camp. I guess the only thing I'd say is I as soon as it came out, I asked at the next day's noon briefing here, I asked the UN spokesperson, Michelle Montes, for her response. And she actually had a pretty lengthy one that she read on camera and taking issue with both the New York Times and Human Rights Watch, the latter of which was kind of ironic because the day prior, Human Rights Watch was given the UN Prize for Human Rights. But nevertheless, in this case, the UN doesn't take the report as true or balanced, claims it doesn't give them enough credit. I guess the thing that I would say,
just interrupt you there for a second. I think, and I saw Montes' response, I think her critique was not with the substance of the article, she didn't challenge the facts on the ground.
No, she didn't. She said they overemphasized the problems of the UN.
It was a matter of sort of what they emphasized and what sort of the New York Times headline emphasized.
No, I think if you look over, and I'll definitely put up. I ended up putting the whole. You've seen the transcript of what she. Again, I don't want. It's not about Michelle Montes. I guess here's what I'd say, even to you. I agree clearly that things are so bad in the Congo. There's a need for more peacekeepers. But I think Here's two things I'll say to you. Number one, that article. It's not at all clear that 3,000 more troops spread over a huge area is going to change the fundamental kind of like, i.e., not having translators to speak to the local people. Maybe that's a resources question, or maybe it's bad planning. I don't know what it is, but it's not. This wasn't even part of the 3,000 troop proposal to the Security Council. You see what I mean? It's not like It's still things have to be well run. You can throw a second log to throw on the fire is that the North Kivu is run by these Indian peacekeepers. That's their turf. They're the primary troop contributing country in that area. There was this pretty scandalous situation in which a colonel of the Indian peacekeepers was found on tape praising Laurent Nkunda not long ago. And again, that doesn't mean that you tarnish the whole UN, or it's just to say that's not a resources question. I'm not a fan of Europe, and we can turn to the cynicism of David Miliband and the Germans not sending peacekeepers. But I think I think UN proponents are ill-placed to blame really bad performance at times on the P5 not giving them enough money. They have, it's not, I don't know, I think, readers can read the story and make up their own mind whether the problem here is simply 3,000 more peacekeepers or something more fundamental.
Well, I think the problem is in part manpower, but it's more about how I think we in the West or people that claim to care about the situation in the Congo are sort of treating are not necessarily putting their money where their mouth is, and again here we'll sort of maybe take our turns beating up on the Europeans here a little bit because so earlier this week Secretary General Ban Ki-moon wrote a letter to the European Union asking pleading, begging for them to send their troops there, and European troops are a bit more I don't want to say reliable, but are better equipped and operate under a sort of operate with more resources at their disposal than the sort of Indian contingent or the Ugandan or the Uruguayans or whomever are in Eastern Congo right now, and Ban Ki-moon's letter was summarily ignored by the Europeans.
And I just to play devil's advocate, I mean, the Europeans are cynical and hypocritical, etc. But it also, I think
like Europeans in general. I think
when you're a leader. No, I mean in this case, the military. I'm talking about the defense ministers.
Yeah.
But I guess I just want to say is the way you portray it is sort of like Ban Ki-moon as kind of like martyr to the cause. I mean, I think one could say you're saying. I mean, I read the letter. I'm sure he didn't write it, but this also may reflect. I mean, if you're a leader and you call on somebody to do something, they don't do it, you can blame them, or some people will look at the leader and say, are you leading? You know what I mean? Do you have the gravitas? Do you have were you able to name and shame them? I asked early in the week, what do you say about what's clear that the Europeans are not responding to the call for troops? And they were like, oh, no, it's not over till it's over. I mean, we really think. I think you might have to ask yourself, everything is a priority. To the degree that Ban Ki-moon is reaching out to European leaders this week, was it more about climate change or the Congo? I'm not on the calls. I don't know. And I'm not saying the climate's not an more ongoing problem, right? So anyway, I guess I just want to say, I think in any other context, you'd probably look at, let's flip the script because this being blogging heads. Bush's call to the Republicans in the Congress to back him up and bail out and not require such dramatic cuts to workers of the big three automakers. They didn't follow it. Now, you probably you see this as a failure of Bush's leadership and not as I don't know. You see what I mean? I guess I
don't think the I don't think the analogy is so clear cut.
You have a leader asking a larger group of either followers or people that don't have to follow to do something, and they don't do it. All I'm saying is that it's just it goes on both sides. You seem to portray it as just like Europeans are no good. The UN is asking them to do it, but who knows? Maybe it could be. Did you see Sarkozy's quote? He said it's all in how the UN does things. Anyway,
well, it's one of those things where since the UN has been asking for a rapid deployment of troops to Eastern Congo since October, right?
Yep, definitely.
And the Security Council passed a resolution So authorizing that a couple weeks ago, that's going to,
Sure.
and this, a structural problem with the UN is that it takes a long time to supply peacekeepers once said peacekeepers are authorized.
Well, let's look into that. Why does it take so long? Why would it take so long? The other problem that and again, maybe
because there's no. The reason it takes long is that there isn't sort of a surplus of peacekeepers around the world.
But you know what? In this case, I'm just to sort of to fill out the facts of the case. The Indians are the main peacekeepers in North Kivu. The Indians have an enormously large army. Now, maybe after Mumbai they're not willing to move them, but the problem is that the Congo said they don't want Indians, right? You saw that story. The Congo said,
no, I didn't.
We don't want any more Indians. And the reason for them, that they actually cited sexual abuse as one of the reasons. Now, there are other theories of why they might have said that, but I'm saying these are all facts in play. I guess it's not all the UN's fault, but nor is it like the UN as an institution trying, in a sense, some of the sort of laxity of disciplining peacekeepers, for example, some of the laxity in having the Indian on tape partying with the rebel Laurent Kunda, these things all have consequences, right?
Well, I'm saying there is, clearly a lot of blame to go around, the point I was trying to make before is there is a sort of gap between peacekeepers authorized and peacekeepers deployed.
Definitely. And
the UN lacks a capacity to fill troops in that gap, and that's where sort of Europeans come in.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of Europeans, though, have not stepped up.
They have not, and I agree. It is surprising with all they were at the stake out in front of the Security Council saying it's so important and humanitarian access. Mm-hmm. It is. I agree. It's very surprising. I actually think, and maybe I'm not. This may be kind of. It's not to let them off the hook. I mean, the Belgians, for example, were on record saying they were pushing hard to try to get these troops there, and you have even some Nordics, from what I've heard. I think that this idea that the EU can only move as a group may, in this case, really have been a problem, because you almost have, it's not a P5, but you almost give a veto to some countries, right? Why can't they say, okay, UK and Germany, you don't want to, but Belgium says it wants to, France wants to, but probably should be not allowed to, given its history in the region, but there probably are some Nordics that would do it. Why can't those who want to do it? But instead they say the EU will meet in Brussels, and unless everyone agrees, they're not doing it, and so they're not doing it. Right?
That's actually a very good point, and it challenges, frankly, my, I see sort of like long-term sort of the integration of European security forces as being sort of an overall good thing.
Sure.
In the world, and the sort of dynamic you raise now, I think, challenges.
In this case, it's paralysis. No, it's resulted in paralysis.
That sort of assumption I have, which is something I'll have to think about and think through. But that was an interesting point.
No, so that anyway, I mean, the one thing I also, and this, I think this is a pretty. It's not even a follow-on. It's related. Today, the buzz in the building is as follows: that there is a report by a UN Security Council group of experts that has, for many years now, looked at those who violate Democratic Republic of the Congo sanctions, right? Who's arming the rebels, basically, and who's stealing natural resources. And these reports have always been pretty damning. And one time there was a mention in one of the reports that uranium was snuck out of the country, and people thought it went to Iran. There's always been a kind of a thriller aspect to these reports.
Yeah.
But this report that's coming out today, there's a press conference in 1 hour about it, is one that is highly explosive, maybe badly timed, because what it says is that the government of Rwanda is actively supporting the forces of Laurent Kunda, that they have recruited child soldiers for Nkunda, that Nkunda's CNDP force does all of its banking in Rwanda, and I guess if this is all true, which it probably is, then I guess it's a great time for the report. The reality is the release of the report right now is leading to. It's hard to say that it's going to make these discussions they've been having between Rwanda and Congo go smoother. So it's actually, in this case, I'm usually like, whatever you find out, the truth, you should report it. In this case, it's going to be interesting to see, because already it's led each side to say, who's the UN to say that? Rwanda's attacked the UN for issuing the report. The Congo also doesn't do that well in the report, because it confirms Congolese government supporting the Hutu rebels, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I'm saying I'm not sure. Maybe that's just more of a news thing. But
I mean, listen, and these reports, like you said, they've periodically issued the report. So it's like a panel of investigators that sort of follow up on sort of a years old sanctions resolution. Mm-hmm. I remember a few years ago. I think it was probably maybe the first report of the sanctions committee. Talked sort of squarely about Rwanda's role in the conflict.
Sure.
And there was this staggering statistic, if I remember, something like, I don't remember the specific numbers, but one of the major minerals resources that's found in Eastern Congo is coltan, which is this an ore that's used to make batteries and laptops and iPods and things like that. And so there's Rwanda, it turns out, was one of the world's major exporters of coltan, though there is no known coltan reserves in Rwanda.
That is true. There's also cassiterite. There's a slew of minerals, and both sides, I think it's pretty clear. Both the quote Tutsi forces of General Nkunda and the FDLR, and the Mai Mai and all these other rebels. They're all. And at one point, Ugandan-backed rebels. Sure.
Even
timber.
Sort of a scramble for these resources.
But also, it gets as kind of. I don't want to say that's petty, but timber and charcoal. Some of these are like charcoal wars, like cutting down trees and burning them to sell as charcoal. It's outrageous. But here's I think this one should be in your wheelhouse. Number one, as a teaser, supposedly, we had Madeleine Albright here this week, so I'm going to let you, but. In leading up to that, here's an international law and Rwanda conundrum for you.
Yeah,
I'd like your response.
So shoot
it's a conundrum. No, this is your. This is right down. This is right down your alley.
Go for it. Yeah.
We just had I'm trying to think how to set this up. Oh, it is Human Rights Week, so we knew we'd get to this. But it's the 60th anniversary on December 10th of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In celebration thereof, the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, came to headquarters, and she held a press conference, among other speaking engagements that she had. And she was asked, sort of what does she do in terms of human rights, in terms of the UN and its peacekeepers, and their possible sometimes involvement or complicity in violations of rights or the UN's failure to discipline them. And she said it's a serious issue, and said that her office, among other, she said that they've actually blocked some Nepali generals from serving due to their involvement in disappearances in Nepal. But she mentioned the case of this Rwandan general called Karenzi that is currently serving in UNAMID in Sudan. But she said that her office had raised this issue, that he had been accused of war crimes in 1994 in Rwanda. He's a Tutsi, so he's on the side of the current government, but had been accused of sort of retaliatory killing of civilians, let's say. And she said, this was sort of showed the place of human rights in the UN system. That she'd raised this, that there'd been a controversy about it. She didn't. It's hard to say because he still has the job, right? Now here's the conundrum. Just now, earlier today, the lead prosecutor of the UN International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was here, and was asked, why hasn't his tribunal put on trial any of the current, those in power, the Tutsis? Obviously, almost all of the war crimes were committed by Hutus, but there definitely was some going the other way. And he said in the case of Karenzi that he'd cleared him, no problem, no case. So you have this within the UN system. There seems to be I guess you can say it's a factual dispute, but there's also sort of what should be the place? How seriously should the UN itself take allegations of war crimes by its own force commanders? Mark?
Well, you raise a lot of questions there. The first thing you say is that no Tutsis have been prosecuted by the ICTR, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda.
Yes.
I sort of don't follow the ICTR proceedings as closely as I do ICTY, but a parallel can be drawn. I think certainly to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and they're sort of sister institutions. They share the same appellate court, and that is that the ICTY has never has sort of never prosecuted any NATO or allied forces for alleged war crimes committed. And there are a few things that they might have looked into, like bombing of a TV station, bombing of the Chinese embassy, bombing of a bridge,
cluster bomb use in Serbia.
Cluster bomb use. There were things that they could have looked into, and their answer is that we did look into this, and we found that there wasn't sort of that nothing that nothing was worth prosecuting. Like you said, it could be a sort of a convenient way to to make sure that your funders are not the ones being sort of.
I think in the case
targeted.
of Rwanda, the current government of Rwanda said that they would not work with the ICTR if any of their people were prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
And basically the tribunal gave into that.
Well, and you have a similar situation, or you had for a while in Serbia, in the previous Serbian government, and what it takes is international pressure, against, and it worked in Serbia. The Serbian government is now pretty cooperative towards handing over suspects to the ICTY. But yeah, this it's one of those things where it's clearly a difficult situation, but I was actually I mentioned the ICTY NATO investigation. I was pretty satisfied with that answer at the time, because when you sort of look at sort of crimes committed, the broad scheme of things, it seems like not only was it probably politically convenient not to investigate NATO, but it also probably wasn't worth the wasn't worth the efforts of the prosecutors, because there were more serious crimes on the ground to investigate.
But I guess I probably disagree with you. I think that the credibility, even because I agree. I mean, like for example, in Rwanda, I'll be the first to say that the genocide was committed almost by Hutus against Tutsis and moderate Hutus. There's no question, right? But if you're going to, in the fight back or trying to stop the Hutus, there was definitely killing of civilians by Tutsis, right? Nothing to compare. It's not. There's no moral equivalence. But I think that they themselves admit that some abuses took place. And I just think for these tribunals to be credible, you have to go out of your way. You shouldn't go overboard, but to have absolutely no prosecutions, it ends up looking. I mean, it's back to like this idea of victor's justice. But it's beneath the process. It really, I think, undermines the credibility. And in fact, back to old Human Rights Watch, the recent prize winner, they wrote a letter today. I mean, that's what allowed me to ask Mr. Jallo, the prosecutor. I said, have you seen this Human Rights Watch letter dated yesterday to you saying you should, in the remaining time, prosecute RPF, i.e. Tutsi people? And he said he hadn't seen the letter, which was not that credible. And he also said he pretended he didn't know General Karenzi at first. And then he said, yes, I know that case. We cleared him. Which is kind of amazing, given that's why I'm bringing up another part maybe it's to the UN's credit.
Just another sort of political wrinkle to add to this is, if the ICTR were to set its sights on Karenzi, the likely response by the Rwandan government would be to pull its peacekeeping troops from Darfur. And Rwanda is sort of one of the biggest contributors.
But then, do we admit that these tribunals, that it is all political?
Let me say, and you have, it's like you said, it's a really tricky situation, and one parallel sort of we can draw. I don't know if you remember this, but a few years ago there was a coup in Fiji. And Fijians have been, peacekeeping troops around the world. And at the time, Kofi Annan said, "We're not going to take any more Fijian troops so long as you let this coup stand." The problem is the stakes are a little lower when you're talking about Fijian.
And they never stopped taking Fijians, by the way, Mark. I asked throughout, after the coup and for months thereafter, what's up with the Fijians. They never stopped taking them. That was sort of it was never implemented, by the way.
I'm saying that the consequence on the ground in Darfur could be dire should... they're already only deployed at half their capacity now.
Yeah, okay, you know what?
If they lose another few thousand troops, it'd be...
But here's and maybe this will tighten it, because I hear everything that you're saying. In fact, Navi Pillay, this is the first time at least I'd seen her and been able to ask her questions as the new High Commissioner of Human Rights. She said just that. She said, that the UN is taking the approach of trying to give better training, rather than itself even attempt to tell troop contributing countries that it wants to discipline peacekeepers because, quote, we need the troops. That's what she said. The next hour, her representative here at UN in New York, Craig McIver, gave a press conference about the place of human rights in the world and how it was a poll saying that people all over the world support human rights even if their governments don't. And it was a very kind of rah-rah situation. And I certainly hope that those are the people's views. But he said at the end, in response to somebody's question, don't accept government's justifications for human rights violations, because everyone has a justification, but it's just that. A violation is a violation. And so I guess my question is, the UN saying we can't discipline peacekeepers who rape young children because we need the troops too much.
Well,
isn't that a justification?
No one said that.
We can't guarantee that they will be disciplined. We send them back to a country, and we provide no reports and no transparency if discipline is ever meted out. They do say that. That is their position. They can
It's
also...
not the position. It's sort of like what... It's not like a position to take. It's sort of a reflection of sort of our
That's
current...
the agreement that they entered
into. It's a reflection
into.
of like current international law.
No, it's not the law. These are agreements that could be amended. These are agreements that could be amended tomorrow. This is not the law. The law doesn't.
No, they can only be amended if member states agree to let sort of international, justice, and if member states agree to allow the UN to launch prosecutions on their home territory, which a lot of member states aren't willing to do. So let me just maybe take a step back and sort of try to outline what you're describing. So right now, if a peacekeeper is accused of misconduct, they are repatriated, and once repatriated, there is no mechanism for the UN to guarantee that they have sort of faced justice, right? It is up to each member state to prosecute their own nationals.
Correct.
And usually this happens in courts martials. It could happen in
often it doesn't happen at all
as well. But
often it does not happen.
It also, it often cannot happen at all. So this is I think a problem of and perhaps I think sort of international law should intervene, and this is a space I think in which there might be room for international law to work, is that there needs to be some sort of international convention providing for the requiring, frankly, the discipline of peacekeepers. Or of any UN. Really, it's
this is
all
up to the UN Secretariat.
Well.
If it today proposed new agreements for contributing countries,
Pakistani government, why would you want?
Well, they have because they want the money to send the peacekeepers. They're not. I mean, these countries are paid.
It's not even developing world countries. It's also like UN staff members accused of misconduct.
No, but
if they're American, if they're Canadian, it doesn't matter. The problem is. That there is no sort of international, that member states are not willing to create laws to force them to prosecute.
It's just a decision to treat peacekeepers,
nationals.
There's just a decision to treat military. It's just a decision, which doesn't have to remain the case, to treat military different than civilian. Only this week, a UN staff member, non-U.S. national, it leaked out that he was found to be, viewing porn inside the UN on UN computers. All right, he's been suspended. He's been disciplined by the UN, and he's going to go through a thing, and he'll probably lose his job. Right, but they won't do that. So a civilian UN staff member for viewing porn can be disciplined, but a peacekeeper with a gun can't be, and it's a choice. Again, I'm not saying it's easy. Maybe some countries would fall away. I don't know.
Well, there are I think different categories of civilians. Like the civilian you're describing at the UN presumably is not out on a mission and have diplomatic immunity, right? So if I'm deployed to Cameroon and I have and I'm there sort of as a diplomatic aegis, and I get in trouble, I could either be prosecuted by the Cameroonian courts or my home country. And oftentimes the problem with and Cameroon's probably a bad example, say East Congo, there's not a functioning judiciary there, so it would be sort of contrary to international law to put me on trial.
It's two different questions whether the Congo could do the prosecution or the UN, which is putting the people out to put people out with their blue helmets on in the field.
Is not like a body that's sort of capable. I mean, they're not like federal prosecutors. It's not
the DPKO has a lot of people. It's like a military. It could have a military justice system. I guess
I would be all for that. Frankly, I would be all for a court of some sort of like military uniform code of military justice and courts martials within the UN system. But I just think that, at least currently, member states are not going to want to.
Maybe you need a new Secretary General that comes in and says it's more.
They've tried that. I mean, there are like these. There is an ongoing sort of process of reform on this.
I've never seen them actually say. Even the Fijians.
Prince Zaid of Jordan was the one who who was spearheading this. I can post links up
right. We know
the point is that I'm all for having like a UN court to
then it takes
has jurisdiction over peacekeepers and has jurisdiction over civilians.
It takes either a secretary general.
I just think that member states are not quite willing to make that.
Well, I'd rather see a UN secretariat that proposed it and had some member states say, "Screw you, we won't give peacekeepers anymore," than to have the UN in the position of justifying what I think is unjustifiable. The analogy I would make is, what if the U.S. military said, yes, our soldiers in Iraq committed these abuses, but we're not going to have any disciplinary procedure because otherwise we couldn't get volunteers anymore. That would be laughable. It would be laughable, right? That's a justification for not doing what you must, which is if you put people out in the field with your insignia on and a gun and they commit abuses, you have to ensure that there's discipline. It's not acceptable. If you can't do that, you shouldn't put them in the field with a gun, which I know sounds very absolutist, but I know that if a country said to you what I think what seems to me the UN is saying, which is that because we're doing God's work, we need volunteers, therefore we really can't crack down on it when they abuse. It's not acceptable. I know you might think it's oversimplification, but moving right along. Madeleine Albright, she appeared. Why? Same topics. She and William Cohen have a report out about advising the Barack Obama administration how to prevent and confront genocide. They have a book. They have a committee, and they came and in the same Human Rights Week they made a presentation. And Madeleine Albright spoke for 5 or 10 minutes, and she talked about her role in the Balkans, and she talked about a number of things, and she didn't mention Rwanda, which during the time of the Rwandan genocide, she was the ambassador at the UN, and on behalf of the Clinton administration, cast a number of votes to withdraw peacekeepers from Rwanda, right?
Yeah.
So it seems to some the height of incongruity, to be diplomatic, to have Madeleine Albright giving a talk about genocide and not mentioning even like lessons learned, even saying like, I know that Clinton has said it. You could probably better than I describe what Susan Rice's role at the time was. What happened? What's going on, Mark? Not that you speak for Madeleine Albright, of course, but what's up?
What about? I don't know how. As U.S. ambassador to the UN at the time, I don't know how closely involved in actually making policy that Albright was at the time. My sense is she probably took directions from the State Department and from the White House and voted accordingly. I think we should judge her probably more by her actions when she was in more of a leadership position at the State Department than when she was UN ambassador. That said, I have no idea why she wouldn't mention Rwanda in a report on genocide. Presumably, the report is mentioned. Rwanda is probably.
She said it's not about the past; somewhere. It's all about the future, baby.
So, did she talk about Bosnia and Kosovo?
Oh, she did, and William Cohen said her role was tremendous. It's sort of like they wanted to say,
her role was big in
I'm sure
Bosnia and Kosovo. I don't think, from what I've read about Rwanda, the locus of action for U.S. policy, and this is documented really very brilliantly in Samantha Power's Pulitzer Prize winning Problem from Hell was not at the locus of action was at the NSC.
But let's go back
not at U.S. UN, right?
Right, but let's. I think you can always. U.S. UN is always taking its orders from at least the State Department, right? So I just say, we could go back to old Bolton. We could say he's not responsible for what he did over here either, right? He was just following out orders. But I think if you're the one standing up and saying, being obstreperous and saying, no, we are pulling our troops out. I agree. It definitely was a Clinton thing, and it happened after Somalia and Black Hawk Down. But it just seemed very strange to have the U.S. presenting itself. Again, you can always do better, and hopefully this is a turnabout, and the new administration will be much more aggressive in looking for early warning signs, and there's definitely some good recommendations. I guess I'm just saying it seemed. Yeah. it seemed more than a little.
So
ironic.
you're upset that Albright didn't mention Rwanda in her remarks in the report.
It seemed obvious. And I asked her, actually. I said to her, "What did you learn from Rwanda?" You know what she said? The Secretariat didn't give us good enough information, which we both know refers to, memo cables that were sent by Romeo Dallaire, etc. But the U.S. knew very clearly that after Somalia and the death of service members in Somalia, the Clinton administration decided we are not sending any more peacekeepers to Africa unless we have a deep strategic interest at stake. And what I've never understood about it is it's totally fine for the U.S. to say we're not. I mean, it is what it is. But it seemed like they and the Belgians and others took the position that since we're not sending peacekeepers, we don't want anyone to do it because then we'll look bad.
I mean,
so let's get out.
There's this, famously. Well, I don't know, not so famously, probably, because I only found this out recently.
Okay.
The Belgians actually lobbied other members of the Security Council
to not
have to have them not authorize, not reauthorize the peacekeeping force there.
No, and it's amazing. But I think the U.S. was in the same position. I mean, I think even though the Belgians, you can say they lost as right after the plane crash of the president in 1994, 10 of their peacekeepers were killed. So it was a big issue domestically, and so whatever. But I mean, I think the U.S. it's pretty clear by all accounts that the U.S. was foursquare with the Belgians and was not at any point saying let's send more people. They were like we're getting out. We're getting
absolutely.
Out. So it just seemed
it was like a terrible it was absolutely a terrible failure.
But here, I mean, again, not to jump from failure to failure, but here's a kind of some may view this as a positive story and some may not. The riots in Greece. I don't know. Maybe I hang with the wrong people, but I know many people that see it as a sign of kind of not. I mean, obviously the shooting of a 15-year-old boy in Central Africa. Can
you just maybe take a step back and sort of explain?
I never do facts, Mark.
Why
I will
are
do
the
facts.
Riots?
Okay, definitely. I mean, the why are the riots is a much longer discussion, but the trigger, the short-term trigger was an incident in a notoriously quote anarchist section of central Athens, Exarchia, which is actually it has its university campuses, and these quote unquote anarchists can go onto the campus and the police can't follow. And every year on November 17th, which is a commemoration, they kind of break all the computers in the school. Anyway, I've been spending a lot of time with the Greek mission about this one, so it's a whole. But so to make a long story short, there was, as happens in this part of Athens, a confrontation between police and fired up youth Saturday, so it's like 6 days ago now, and the pretty much, although there's still facts to come out, the youth were throwing rocks and in some accounts Molotov cocktails at a police car, and the policeman emerged and fired 3 bullets, and a 15-year-old who turns out not to really be the one throwing anything was shot dead. This triggered nearly immediate riots, not only in Athens but in Thessalonica and on Crete and in Corfu and all over Greece. There were first, anarchist youth, and then other youths, and then what they called the masked people in black masks, engaged in so far 6 nights in a row, pitched battle with the police, throwing rocks. And I think what's interesting and why I'm not going to is that the restraint. I mean, at least from a U.S. perspective, the government immediately apologized and suspended the police with, like, I'm not saying no due process. They were like, this is terrible. In fact, the police guy who fired has been charged with murder, which I don't think would happen here. And the government, the idea, I mean, I don't know. My sense of New York City today is that to many New Yorkers, unless there was a clear racial element to it, if you said teenagers were throwing bottles of gasoline at the police and the police fired a bullet, many New Yorkers would say that's the police's job. Don't you think? I mean, maybe I'm misreading public opinion here, but I think that's certainly kind of the daily news, kind of, Joe the plumber would say, screw it. But in Athens, and it's explained to me that because of the military coup, because of a variety of factors, there's a deep distrust and even disgust with authority, certainly with the police. And so the riots are actually pretty popular. I mean, I know, and whatever, they're pretty popular. The opposition, PASOK party, has called for the government to step down or hold new elections. It's all in chaos. But so then you could say, well, what does any of this have to do with the UN or UN Plaza? But, well, maybe it has nothing, because I asked Ban Ki-moon's spokesperson after 4 days of riots, and the one thing to say is that being kind of in this bubble of international news, since Saturday, certainly until like Thursday, these Greek riots were the lead story on BBC, on CNN International, on Al Jazeera. Like, this is the story, because the images, I guess, are so, it's incredible. But also, it's a pretty big story. So Ban Ki-moon, any comment on the shooting and particularly more so, the riots and the whole situation in Greece? No comment at all. So maybe this is, I don't know. First,
and you're like, and you're shocked.
No, I guess I'm okay. Maybe I'm not. I'm shocked because 2 days earlier, Ban Ki-moon's office had put out a lengthy prepared statement about unrest in the city of Jos, Jos, in Nigeria. And I mean, again, we can say how many people were killed. I bet you more people around the world certainly heard of Greece than Jos. There's no question. Now, whether Jos is more of a threat to international peace and security than riots throughout Greece, I don't know. But what I've taken from this is that... Go ahead. The UN has a double standard.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the violence in Jos was around an election, right? And a number of people were killed, surrounding voting in elections. Unfortunately, sometimes in places like Nigeria can be opportunities for violence, and that is I think there's probably a substantive difference between the sort of causes of violence. But go on.
No, exactly. And I'm sorry to do it in this way because I'm not trying to set you up to be the defender of a double standard. I think there's a double standard.
It's easy to defend.
I think there's no. Case, so. I guess I look on it this way. So if there was street violence in Europe around an election, would this UN comment? I don't think so.
Well, I don't think
there would be street violence around an election.
I think the death toll the death toll was substantial.
Mm-hmm.
And I
maybe that's the distinction.
Since has there been in Europe has there I can't think of an election that caused that kind of violence in a very long time.
No, but I had no idea that the UN's that it's not violence, but so is the UN then the kind of defender of the sanctity of democracy in the sense of if there's violence around an election, they're going to comment on it. I look on it this way. I'm pretty sure.
Well,
this
I think
is why
he expressed his concern was the comment, but I think I think maybe there are 2 points to make. I think that I don't think there's much of a double standard because I don't think the situations are comparable in any way. Greece, even though it seems like this has this a real kind of throwback riot with anarchists. Riots in Europe these days generally don't involve anarchists.
Sure.
They're more ethnic.
Did he comment about
basis.
the Paris riots? I don't think so. Did he? No, he did not.
I don't know. I don't think they are necessarily sort of comparable situations.
I think indulge me for a moment.
Yeah.
My view of the double standard, and I've been trying to think about it. I think what it is nobody, to tell you the truth, just like Omar al-Bashir, most countries don't like being commented on by the UN. And I take this from even just this very week. There was an event by the Nigerian mission. So I asked the Nigerian ambassador to the UN, what do you want the UN to do in the Niger Delta, right? They have this conflict about oil. It's a big situation. She said, we don't want any UN involvement. We don't want to internationalize that conflict. We are in full control of our territory. On the record quote. And I think that is the approach of almost every country in the world, including the U.S., including Europe.
Yeah, sure.
The thing is that it's only respected in. This is the sort of devil's advocate hypothesis. My hypothesis is that there are countries in Europe which are described as enormous supporters of the UN. They're certainly donors. They love it. But again, they don't love it if it's going to comment on them. They view it as a kind of a thing to comment on Africa. I can't tell you how many people this week I've talked to and said, well, Africa. Somebody said, well, they commented on Nigeria because, Africa always has problems. That's a little bit strange. I mean, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying.
It was this comparison you make between Jos and Athens, I think, is it's a little more troubling only because again, and it was likely I think the comment was made to shine a maybe to try to force the Nigerian government's hand in trying to put a stop to this.
Whatever they not have the gumption.
Whatever the intended effect, the problem on the ground in Jos, Nigeria was killing on a much larger scale, and also killing that threatened to spread. And
this Greek thing was spreading. I mean, I don't know. You tell me. I mean, I guess we just presume that no problem in Europe is going to get that serious, or that the governments in Europe are all reasonable, so they don't need to be prodded by the UN.
I think it's a reasonable assumption to make, though. I mean, Greece, for its problems, has a sort of rule of law is ingrained in Greece.
How about the rule of law in Italy?
In European society, there is a much stronger tradition of democracy and more importantly the rule of law in Europe than there is in a place like Nigeria.
How about in Italy, Berlusconi passing a law? Sorry. There you go. You're here to hear.
Yeah.
In French too. Just a sec. There you go. No, but how about? And maybe you're going to say this is off base too. In Italy, when the government of Berlusconi tries to pass a law saying that no sitting person can be tried for any crime, you know what I mean? Kind of an impunity law. That I think if it were done in Burundi, if it were being passed in Burundi, the UN would criticize that very law. They would say this is not a good sign, and we're very concerned. And so this is what I think I mean by double standards. It seems like if you're a donor, you can do whatever you want, and there's no. I know.
See, I think it has less to do with who's giving money to whom than it does with a more regionally, it's the rule of law is much stronger in Europe. In Italy, despite Berlusconi's machinations, I might not like Bush that much. He might have pushed through some laws I find disagreeable, but at the end of the day, rule of law, generally prevails.
Right, but Kofi Annan criticized the U.S. war in Iraq, and for that he was much celebrated. I think that was. I actually think, to be honest, I think that's one of the roles of the UN. It's just more important for the UN to use its firepower to stand up to abuses by the powerful than to be constantly not obsessing. It seems to me like shooting fish in a barrel to micromanage the electoral process of Burundi, and to say nothing about the biggest world news for 4 days in a row. We have nothing to say about that, but we're going to have a 4-hour debate.
Also, if you look at sort of the effect of Ban Ki-moon criticizing Greek anarchists or the Greek police is sort of that criticism would have a much sort of smaller effect in Greek politics.
Because they don't need the money. Because they don't need the money. That's it.
Then the effect of a UN criticism of something happening in Nigeria, where the UN has a much larger presence, right?
I'm not actually sure that Nigeria cares that much. I think it does come down to money. I think if you need money,
speaking.
But that's what I mean by a double standard. If you're in a position of need, then you're open to anything the UN wants to say about you.
Well, but
if you don't need, then
it's that the UN is in a position of greater potential influence. So the UN issuing a statement over killing sectarian violence in Jos, Nigeria, around politics and election, maybe the effect is also similarly negligible, but it will have something. It'll have a larger effect on the ground than what a similar
the UN
statement
calls for
criticizing Greece.
The UN calls for the Al-Shabaab Islamists to stop. The UN calls for the Al-Shabaab Islamists to stop attacking the Ethiopian troops. It has zero effect, right? They're not going to stop. We know why they do it. They don't care what the UN says. But nevertheless, it's said, because it can be said, and no one's going to say don't say it. But if you were to say a word about Greece, you'd get a call very quickly from Greece saying, "Who are you?" And you'd say, "Okay, I made a mistake. I won't do it again." I don't know. I'll just as another one. There's between Slovakia and Hungary. I'm just having recently gone to Europe. I came across this. There's actually I wasn't aware of it. There's a lot of kind of ethnic tension, and there was some soccer hooligans. Anyway, there were events that actually, were they to happen in Guinea-Bissau, would draw a UN comment. I'm convinced. But it's in Europe. Maybe the idea is that the EU and the whole kind of regional organizations can handle it. And so if you're a country in a region, except we say we have so much respect for the AU, but I'll say from this Nigerian event, there was a kind of a subtext of let the AU do it in Africa. Maybe there's a little bit too much UN. And I'm saying, I don't even know, I don't agree or disagree with that. I'm just saying, I don't know why. I don't mean to overdo it, but there's something incongruous here. And I guess what I really want to do is, I know that there are particularly countries that are, I guess you'd have to have a test case come up, whether what are viewed as the major supporters of the UN. I'm thinking the Nordic countries. I think there may be a kind of there's an expectation of hey, it's good to not point the finger elsewhere. I don't know. I almost, not to come full circle, it goes back to the idea of like the Rwandan tribunal trying some Tutsi or RPF forces, or maybe some at least more public inquiry into NATO's behavior in the Balkans. It has to do with credibility, and I think maybe not that many people like actually count up the statements by continent or compare like Jos to Athens or whatever. But to me, I mean, and I think I pick up in not in Nigeria. I mean, who knows? There's something. It might be important. It's almost like maybe this is a more positive way to say it. When there was Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. I mean, maybe the U.S. doesn't want to be seen as a basket case, right? But there was inaction by a government. There were people suffering. Where was UNICEF? Where was UNFPA? Why was the WFP? And I'm not putting them down. I think there's this idea that if they somehow sprung into action in the U.S., it would be viewed as an enormous insult to the country. But the reality is in many other countries, it's equally insulting, or taken that way. But we just don't care. The UN. The idea is that the powerful can choose when to be commented on, when to be a subject of concern, and others can't. Excuse me.
Incidentally, I was actually at the UN in 2005 during Hurricane Katrina, and there was actually a really pretty big outpouring of support. There was a big sort of like clothing drive and all that going on right in the middle of the lobby in the UN, and to the extent that there wasn't much. I know we got help from Canadians and other and other folks, but the UN didn't. Official UN agencies didn't spring into action to rescue.
No, I understand. Don't waste your resources.
Katrina, but there was an outpouring of support.
But I think I guess the question is, to the degree it was the UN's wisely marshaling its resources and not wasting it on a country that really didn't need the help. That's one thing. But I think that there is, I guess the thing that this whole thing has made me think of is like, I was just struck by Nigeria saying, we don't want any help in the UN in this armed conflict in our country. They didn't say, it wasn't even about a peacekeeping force. It was, we don't even want the UN commenting on it. And it was to me very interesting. We don't want to internationalize the conflict. It's ours. We control our territory. Let's not talk about it. So it's very interesting, and I think what it struck me is like, you know what? I mean, I guess we can. I think both of us may say like the sort of the. I mean, in the U.S., people are like, we don't want to give up our sovereignty to the UN, but it's like they're not alone in that. There's a lot, and it's just sort of interesting, like where that's not the UN's fault, right? That's governments wanting to say we don't want to lose control of a problem, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
But some governments are respected by the UN, and others aren't. And I understand in the case, I guess, of you say Bashir. Well, we shouldn't respect it. Okay. Mugabe. We shouldn't respect it. But the Nigeria case, I think, is kind of interesting. And I guess as a matter of reporting, I want to find out whether they sought the views of the Nigerian government before they commented.
Well, maybe next time.
All right. I'm sorry. I know this was a bit of a rant.
We got a little scrappy.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to rant, but I think.
No. You're fine.
All right.
I think maybe if we can speak in 2 weeks, we can do our annual year-end.
Oh, excellent.
Let
me get ready. I'm going to start drinking nothing but juices. I'll go to the sweat lodge. I'm going to get into the full.
Get into. We'll do our UN top 10 stories of the year.
Okay.
Remember we did that last year.
We did. That's going to be good.
Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah. Just remember, foreign policy can 6 or 7 spots. There's definitely some corruption has its place, and as you'll soon see.
Well, we will. We'll talk about it next time. In the meantime, for viewers, I am trying hard to interview someone who could speak intelligently about the climate change negotiations which are going on in Poznań, Poland, and if all goes according to plan. Next week on UN Plaza, we'll be talking about that, which I think is kind of a big important story that's going somewhat unreported here in the United States, but is of great consequence.
You can get Ivo de Boer; he'll talk to anyone.
Yeah. Well, no, I want someone less official who will tell me how it is.
Don't forget the indigenous.
Not how they wish it was.
This is my only 2 cents to you is don't forget the indigenous. There's this program called RED, which sounds all very good. It's very European.
I'm
but
all about
these indigenous are very much.
Well, so the problem is there's we'll talk about it more next week.
Okay, absolutely.
But
I'm just throwing RED
from what I gather, this conference, while helpful, is not sort of enough to build momentum for the big post-Kyoto climate change treaty that will be hammered out a year from now. So until then,
Okay,
Matthew, we'll talk soon.
All right.